Welcome, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, brother.
Joining us once again is Derek Davison. Derek is the proprietor of the Foreign Exchanges newsletter, FX_newsletter on Twitter, and co-host along with Danny Bessner of the American Prestige pod. Derek, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Derek's both American Prestige and FX newsletter, I think, are indispensable at normal times, but especially in emergencies like the one we're seeing now in Gaza. There's a few things I wanted to cover with you, Derek. The first being hostages. Hostages are a big, you see a lot of celebrities demanding Joe Biden release the hostages.
That was a good one. Like, what is Joe Biden going to do exactly to release the hostages? I love that one. That was great.
Keep bombing Gaza, I think, is the implicit message there somehow. But yeah, and we also see hostages be released, and the sort of different ways we want to relay that information. The image of one of the released hostages shaking hands with a Hamas operative is causing a lot of stir. I'm curious, people come to this. And maybe not super read in, but they know hostages are at play here. What do you tell those people?
I think you tell them, taking hostages is a war crime. It's rightly regarded as an atrocity. It shouldn't happen. These people should all be released. But what's done is done. In that sense, they are taken. They are in Gaza. And bombing Gaza to rubble and then bombing it some more until, I guess, you deatomize the molecules of the rubble that you've created, is not going to get them home alive. That's not a strategy. Neither is a massive ground invasion that just goes in, shoot first, ask questions never. I think it's right to be outraged that they were taken. It's right to, feel anger about that or however you respond to it. But if you want to get them back alive, then the only way to do that is to negotiate and to give whatever mediators are you're using, the Red Cross, Qatar, Egypt, whoever is playing mediator at this point, to give them time to try and work something out. And yeah, that means potentially giving concessions to Hamas, I guess, although they haven't really given Hamas anything yet for the hostages that have been released. And I don't know that they're necessarily looking for anything substantial for these civilian hostages. I think, in the case of military personnel they've taken, they would probably demand the release of Palestinian prisoners. But the civilians, you might have to, turn on, allow fuel back in, or you might have to do something that seems, a little bit, if you're really gung-ho, don't negotiate with hostage takers or whatever, if that's your position, then recognize that, most of these people are probably going to die if that's the stance that you take. That's how I would kind of lay it out, I guess, if I were try to talk somebody down.
Yeah, because I think the concern about the hostages is a real one, and so we somehow have this shift happen where no, it's actually about teaching people a lesson about terrorism, and then it's what's the actual priority here? Because the truth is there are a lot of Palestinians in Israeli jails as well, and an increasing amount post this thing, and I guess you say we never want to give terrorism a win. But that means you are sacrificing those hostages.
Yeah, people say this all the time, and you see it again and again in places where this sort of thing is more common. It hasn't been. It's been years, I think, since Hamas took any hostages, and in that case, it was a very small operation. But you see it in other places where kidnapping for ransom, just pure kidnapping for ransom, leave aside all the political context or the idea of prisoner exchanges, where that kind of stuff goes on. And the line from the government is always, well, we never negotiate. We don't pay ransom. We don't do anything that would, but it always, when these people wind up, to the extent that any of them wind up being released, and many of them do, they've gotten something. They've paid a ransom. They've negotiated. They've done something that they, say on principle they won't do. But it's always more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I can't I remember a piece in The Guardian I read during the War on Terror. And it was looking back, and it's like, actually, you do have to negotiate with terrorists if you want cycles of violence. And that specific case study was Ireland. And yeah, like negotiations are preferable to this sort of slaughter. So this brings us to this other sort of thing. David and I have called Joe Biden the press release president at certain times because he'll announce something that sounds great, like we're going to look really hard at what's going on in Yemen or whatever, and the details aren't ever as quite as bolstering to confidence. We're seeing this Joe behind the scenes Biden that he's saying, I don't know if I trust the Palestinian death counts. Despite those,
that was really grotesque. I mean, just don't say anything. Yeah. Like, I don't know who you're trying to impress with that, but that's just vile to look at these people who are being bombed to smithereens and staring at the, what's still, I mean, it's been delayed, so who knows, but what still looks like it's going to be a massive ground invasion in which thousands more of them, tens of thousands maybe, are going to be killed, and to say, well, I don't believe that many of you are dying. Like, I don't have any facts to back this up, as Herman Cain said, friend of the pod. But I just don't believe it. I don't believe you, basically, when you tell me that this is what's happening. Just ugly stuff, really.
Well, what do you make? I mean, this has been something that's been said by a lot of experts or people being interviewed on NPR and those kind of publications.
You can put experts in air quotes there, I think.
That Joe Biden is employing his classic bear hug strategy. Where he sort of makes has the media appearance for the kind of people like very hardcore pro-Israel folks. Joe Biden's staying very firm with Israel, but kind of secretly when he's holding Netanyahu in his arms, he's whispering,
he's whispering in his ear, like, knock it off, pal. Cut it out, man.
What do you make of that?
I mean, it's funny to like, because it's just sort of the scramble for liberals, I think, who want to insist that Joe Biden is doing good in the world. I mean, I guess my question is, what is he prevented from happening? Like, this has been awful. They cut off food, water. They've now allowed a trickle, just the barest trickle of humanitarian aid to come back into Gaza, totally inadequate to the requirements. They've tried to ethnically cleanse Gaza City. They haven't managed to do it because they're still bombing southern Gaza, which is where they told everybody to go. And people who have evacuated, who wound up in southern Gaza with no place to live and are still being bombed anyway. Many of them have decided, screw this, I'm going home. Understandably, I think. The hospitals are, if they haven't already shut down, are on the verge of shutting down. This is people on dialysis because they don't have any fuel to run generators or to run the power plant. So this is people on dialysis. This is kids in incubators. This is, people who are on any number of other life-saving machines are going to die. They're going to die. Like, there's no medical care. I mean, there's medicine now coming in the barest sense, again, in these very inadequate humanitarian shipments. But you can't replicate that stuff. You're not letting anybody out. You're not even letting foreign nationals out, which is amazing to me because you watch the links that Western governments in particular went to get their people out of Israel after the initial attack, to evacuate Israel as though all of Israel were now suddenly in danger, which I guess you could say from the rocket attacks, but this has gone above and beyond how these governments typically respond in situations like this. They've gone to such extents to get people out of Israel, and they're doing nothing, like absolutely nothing, to get anybody out of Gaza, even their own citizens, their holders of their passports who are waiting to be allowed out. They're doing nothing. So it's just been thorough. And now, we haven't even gotten to the bombardment, which has been incessant. And, you keep hearing about, well, they're going to intensify the bombardment. How? Like, how much more can you do here? Within what was it, 6 days or a week or something? They dropped like 6,000 pieces of ordnance on a place that's, barely larger than it's, I think, like the New York to Washington D.C. corridor. That's about the size of it. Just one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Like, what is he preventing? I guess would be is how I would respond. Like, what is the whispering in Bibi's ear and telling him to restrain himself? What's the restraint? What's the evidence of that? Were they going to drop a nuke on these guys and we forestall that? Like, how much worse could this be?
Yeah, exactly. If this is like a 8, then what is a 10 look like? Yeah, exactly. I think that is exactly right. And I keep remembering, books on the Cold War and Kissinger and how he would be talking to liberal journalists the entire time, being like, actually, we need to look tough because of this Cold War stuff, but really we're doing all this humanitarian stuff and we're really talking to them. And yeah, that's clearly just, that's useful more than truthful.
Could you talk a little bit just like on the aid thing, just to catch people up? What are the hurdles right now on getting aid into Gaza?
The hurdles, the big hurdle, according to the Egyptian government anyway, which is sort of overseeing one half of this process, the big hurdle is that the Israeli military keeps attacking the Rafah checkpoint. I mean, they keep bombing it. Every time they're sort of like, they keep hitting the Palestinian side, the Gazan side. And then, at one point they hit an Egyptian guard post on the Egyptian side. And we're like, oops, sorry about that. So, if you ask the Egyptians, it's, we can't go any faster because they keep bombing. The roads are damaged. The infrastructure is, damaged and it's, you have to do inspections, and it's hard to do that, under a state of open warfare, I guess. That's I think a big part of it. I suspect there are, or I imagine there are other logistical issues here. I mean, the fact that you're not allowing fuel in makes it difficult to distribute aid, in addition to, the problems that it creates in terms of electricity and not being able to turn the power plant back on, creates challenges in distributing this stuff around Gaza. So you sort of have to pick a main point of retrieval, and you're asking people to brave airstrikes to come and pick up this stuff that they need to survive. So it's everything here is screaming for a ceasefire, or at least one of these inadequate humanitarian pauses that the Biden administration now says it supports after it vetoed a UN resolution that would have called for humanitarian pauses. There's everything kind of screaming for something like this, and we just don't see it.
Yeah, and you talk about the evacuations of Americans. There's other talk of a wider evacuation preparation for Americans in the Middle East, and I've seen concern that that's in preparation for a broader regional war. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean they're pretty convinced that things are going to escalate, and I think the only question is how much. That there's going to be some response. We've already seen some response. I mean, over the last week, I think there have been 13 attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria from various militias, mostly Iraqi militias. The Hezbollah Israeli border, the Lebanese Israeli border has been in essentially constant artillery fire, daily at least, between Hezbollah and Israel since this started. We saw at one point the Houthis in Yemen tried to apparently fire some cruise missiles in the general vicinity or general direction of Israel. The U.S. Navy shot them down. There's every potential for fault lines all over the region to explode here, and it seems like the Iranians, who are kind of patron to all of these groups, have said that they view the ground invasion as sort of the moment where they don't phrase it like we're going to tell everyone, we're going to fire the starter's pistol and tell everybody to get moving, but it's sort of like this is the moment where everything's going to really pop off once this starts, and that's been their quote unquote red line throughout all of this. So I do think some escalation is sort of baked in at this point, and the U.S. military is, moving air defenses into the region. As you say, they've made these contingency plans to get people out. I think that's sort of a worst case scenario if there is like a full blown regional war, like of the likes of which we really would not want to see. But the fact that they're even planning for it suggests that they think it's a possibility.
I don't want to like put you in the position of having to make predictions or anything like that, but when you hear that kind of rhetoric from Iran, I mean, like how credible do you think that is in terms of any kind of extension of conflict and actors in the area?
I mean, I don't think anybody wants to. I don't think any of the players here want to get things escalated to that level. There are credibility issues here for groups like Hezbollah, for the militias, for Iran itself. That they've supported the Palestinian cause. That Iran has made itself sort of the champion in some respects of the Palestinian cause, as all these Arab countries have kind of gone over and done deals with the U.S. and with Israel to normalize relations. So, I mean, there is an issue here of like, put up or shut up, I think to some extent. But, Hezbollah isn't in position. I mean, Lebanon is, before all of this, Lebanon was a mess. It's imploded. The political system is threadbare. The economy is in total shambles. And Hezbollah's popularity, I mean, to the extent that it's made itself part of the political machine and maybe one of the dominant players in the political machine. I think their image in Lebanon has suffered for that, as people have turned on that machine for the corruption and the ineffectiveness. So, if they're viewed as pulling Lebanon into a war that isn't necessarily what the Lebanese people want, that's not good for them. So I don't think they want to do that. But these kinds of things sometimes go where they want to go without even if nobody wants them to go there.
I'm curious, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I've always thought like the way to actually address this is to build a world consensus. In part, that is, not there because of our support for things like Israel and how the rest of the world sees our sort of rhetoric on the world stage when it comes to whether democracy or genocide or something like that. How does this leave us? Geopolitically, both, particularly in regards to Russia and Ukraine, but just generally.
This is the thing, and this is before all of this started. The Israel-Palestine, I don't know what you want to call it, situation. I mean, nobody likes to call it conflict now for some reason because they think that implies equality between the sides. I don't think that word itself inherently says that, but Israel-Palestine is the number one thing that undermines the U.S. when it goes out to the world and says, well, we're standing on the side of human rights and dignity and freedom versus the evil autocrats, and you should stand with us when Russia invades Ukraine. You should be on our side with Ukraine and against Russia. And then they look at the way that the U.S. responds every time Israel annexes a bit of territory or lobs a few hundred missiles into Gaza, and what are you talking about? Like, what side are you really on? The first and Trump was an aberration in this in terms of rhetoric, in terms of just not even bothering to talk about this stuff. But the first press release or big policy announcement that this State Department had when Biden took over was, we're recentering human rights in U.S. foreign policy. This is going to be the big thing, and it's a joke. I mean, it's really just it's proven over and over again to be nothing but words. And this and to see the U.S. now come in this conflict and just go all out, even as the Israeli military already is responding in disproportionate ways to what happened. And I don't want to minimize or diminish the horror of what took place on October 7th. But, they are killing thousands of people. They're starving people. They are dehydrating people. This is collective punishment on a mass scale, a place that holds about 2.3 million people. And it is, abominable. And you watch the U.S., which, again, we believe in human rights and human dignity. Well, you don't act like it. So why should anybody listen to you? And I don't think this is a huge deal geopolitically, because governments are going to do what they want to do anyway. And this idea that the U.S. is hypocritical. Everybody's hypocritical to some degree, and you're going to find an excuse to do what you want anyway. But it doesn't help. It doesn't help win over anybody to your point of view when you just you repeatedly show that your words are nothing but words.
And like on that, I mean, there's just been, from the get-go, I mean, it's always been, notable what comes out of the United Nations in regards to Palestinians' lives and dignity, and Israel's actions. But in the past couple of days, I mean, things have really taken quite an incredible turn, with Israel basically saying that they're going to refuse access to UN officials. Could you talk a little bit about like Israel's like hardline stance against the United Nations, and like again, like, I mean, I think everyone who listens to this podcast and stuff, we know like, the limitations of the United Nations, right? For what it proclaims to be and what it actually is able to do feasibly. But I mean, this is just pretty naked, basically, what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's sort of, Antonio Guterres, they had a Security Council meeting about Gaza, another one. I think this was their second or third one on Wednesday. And Guterres said, we condemn the attacks of October 7th, but we also have to acknowledge that there are war crimes happening in the response, and, atrocities that need to be stopped. And we need to understand that, those attacks took place in a context. They didn't happen in a vacuum. There is a historical context here. And, kind of mild stuff, really. Nothing that's like agrees. Like, he wasn't saying, they deserved it. Good for Hamas. The UN supports, raping, slaughter of civilians. He wasn't saying anything like that. But the Israeli government is so fragile on this point that they are demanding that he resign now, because he had the temerity to say that this isn't all 100% good guys versus bad guys, and talk to us like we're all five.
The children of light versus the children
of darkness. The children of light versus that's not genocidal. God, I mean, that's just normal things that you say about stuff. He didn't call the people in Gaza human animals, so I guess he's not qualified to be Secretary General of the UN anymore. It's kind of silly, and now, as you say, they're not going to let UN personnel into Israel, which is a convenient way, I guess, to keep anyone from monitoring what's going on in Gaza, or keep anyone from the UN from getting in to monitor what's happening in Gaza. So that may be an ancillary benefit there. It's just a fragility. I mean, I think people who have noticed how back-footed the Israeli government has been over the last, almost 20 days now, I guess it's 18 days. I think they're right. I think, first of all, the attacks themselves were shocking, and I can understand why. I think, part of the reason they were more successful than I suspect even Hamas and company thought they would be is because this Israeli government in particular has treated Gaza as an afterthought, and has moved military resources to the West Bank, for example, to help settlers, carry out pogroms on Palestinian villages. So they weren't ready for it. But I think also there is a definite, it's not anything that's, it's not enough to really shift anything politically yet, but there's a definite sense that popular understanding of this situation has changed. I think there's more understanding of the conditions that the Israeli government has left the Palestinians in, that this is an apartheid state, that Gaza has been effectively an open-air prison camp for 16 years now. And that, people are aware of these things in a way that I would say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they weren't. And it's not as easy for the rhetoric or the propaganda to sort of snow people under and get them back to that place of children of light versus children of darkness, and just shut up, turn off your pretty little head. Don't worry your pretty little brain about this. Just let us take care of it. And I don't think they're quite. I don't think they know how to respond to that yet, and it's got them lashing out at for example, relatively mild statements from the Secretary General of the UN, and just kind of having a conniption fit that he dared to note some historical facts with relation to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely like my experience of awareness about Israel-Palestine. The word cloud in like 2008 was like terrorist, human shield, these sorts of things. And now those things are definitely still here, but you hear settlement, you hear occupation, right, and things like that. And yeah, that is, you can see why there's maybe some alarm. Derek Davison, Foreign Exchanges, that's foreignexchanges.news, and also American Prestige with Danny Bessner. Derek, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys.
I really appreciate it.